Hi, you're on Waves Unmasked. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, stay with us, and enjoy the show. They called it a networking mixer, which is corporate for dress sharp, hold a glass, and pretend the room isn't ranking you. I'd been to enough of them to know my choreography. Stand near the edge of the light, smile when introduced, laugh when the joke doesn't quite land. I wore the navy jacket she liked because it photographed well, and I kept my tie loose enough to look comfortable, but tight enough to look committed. Ren glowed the moment we stepped inside. It wasn't just the light. It was the way people turned toward her, like sunflowers chasing a sun that had learned to walk. A woman in sequins pressed a flute of champagne into my hand before I could refuse. "You must be Emery," she said, as if she'd been briefed, as if I were a useful postscript. I nodded, polite, and asked what she did at the firm. "Strategy," she said, which explained nothing and everything. She pivoted away the second someone more luminous walked past. Ren was luminous. Red heels, black suit, hair pulled back with surgical precision. She placed a hand on the arm of a senior partner, said his name the way people say prayers they don't believe in anymore, and he laughed like she'd given him a gift. I watched, the way you watch a tide you used to stand in without thinking, familiar, beautiful, and increasingly far away. At some point, the room shifted around a portable stage, a microphone, a lit logo, a hush that smelled like citrus and ambition. She climbed the steps like they were owed to her. A spotlight found her face and made it smooth as glass. She began with the expected. Milestones, campaigns, numbers with commas, tiny acknowledgments that made people feel generous. Then she said my name. Once. Twice. Clear enough that my body reacted before my brain did. My shoulders squared, my mouth shaped half a smile. "And to my husband," she said, smiling wider, "who has never tried to outgrow me, threaten my confidence, or take the spotlight. Thank you for knowing your place." There was a beat, like the split second before a glass hits the floor. Then laughter. Applause. A whistle from somewhere behind me. Heat crawled up my neck. The spotlight swung a fraction, catching my face like I was part of the program. I lifted my glass because I couldn't think of anything else to do with my hands. I smiled because screaming wasn't an option. She carried on metrics, teamwork, the village, all the phrases that taste like sugar until you notice the afterburn. The applause swelled for her and washed around me, and I realized for the first time that you can drown while standing upright. After, the room returned to its usual noise. People approached her in orbit. A vice president lifted his phone for a selfie. "Iconic," he murmured. Someone I'd met twice clasped my shoulder and said, "You're a good sport." I nodded on cue. If I'd had lines, I would have missed them. Ren said, brushing my sleeve with her fingers. "Come meet Chase." She said the name like a private joke, a word that had been practiced. A man with an easy grin and a tie in a reckless shade of blue appeared at her elbow. "We couldn't do half of this without her," he told me, eyes on her, voice pitched for a microphone that wasn't there. "She's a killer." "Lucky firm," I said, because it fit the scene. "Lucky you," he added with a wink that pretended to be friendly. Ren laughed, a sound I used to collect like souvenirs, and slid her hand down my arm, a gesture for the cameras no one was holding anymore. The night blurred into a collage, the clink of cutlery from a plated dinner I didn't taste, photos I wasn't in, jokes that landed like paper airplanes. I stood in the right places and nodded at the right times until the right time was finally the exit. In the rideshare home, the city smeared past the windows. Sodium lights, dark shop fronts, a couple arguing at a crosswalk like they were the only two people left on Earth. Wren kicked off her heels the second the door closed behind us and tossed them toward a chair. "My feet are going to sue me," she said, flopping onto the couch. "You were quiet tonight," she added, softening her voice the way people do when they want credit for noticing. "You okay?" I studied the indentation her heels had left in the rug. "Do you like me?" I asked. "Like me, not what I do for you. Not the shape I make in a photo." She blinked, owlish, then laughed. "God, Emery, you're so dramatic." She kissed my cheek, quick, practiced, and rose. "Big day. I'm wiped." The bedroom door clicked shut. I sat on the couch, upright, hands folded, as if someone were about to take my statement. The house hummed in that low, impersonal way machines do when you've forgotten they exist. The refrigerator's patient drone, the HVAC breathing like a tame animal. The champagne left a dry, papery taste at the back of my throat, like someone had replaced my mouth with an envelope. I found the kitchen on autopilot. Water. 2 sips, then 3, as if I could rinse myself back to sense. On the counter, a small stack of mail waited for the future circulars. A coupon packet. Something from the bank with our names printed as if they belonged together in perpetuity. Somewhere down the hall, water started. The shower. I imagined her standing under it with her eyes closed, washing off the night's applause the way you wash off stage makeup. I took my jacket off and hung it exactly where I always did. I straightened the keys in the bowl by the door. I turned off a lamp we hadn't needed. I moved through the house, returning it to neutral. Every small correction, a superstition against falling apart. In bed, the mattress remembered our shapes. Wren exhaled in the deep, unguarded way of someone who trusts her walls. I lay on my back and counted the fan's slow rotations. The words replayed at their own pace, as if they'd been recorded and uploaded. "Thank you for knowing your place. Thank you for knowing your place. Thank you." There's a version of me that turns over, shakes her awake, and asks, "What place is that, exactly?" There's another that gets dressed, walks out, and keeps walking. The version that existed that night lay still and listened to the house settle. A memory arrived without asking permission. Her in a doorway years ago, holding a dripping umbrella, laughing at nothing because we were soaked and young and sure that being cold together was a kind of wealth. She'd pressed her forehead to mine then, little rain pearls skating off her eyelashes, and whispered, "You always make room for me." It had felt like a vow. I must have fallen asleep for a handful of minutes, because I woke with my heart racing like I'd been running. The clock glowed a number that meant tomorrow had already started, and the world didn't care whether I'd caught up. I lay there and tried to name the feeling in my chest. It wasn't anger. Anger is hot and moves quickly. This was cold and still, like the surface of a lake that looks safe enough to walk on until you hear it sing. At some point toward dawn, I got up and moved to the living room. The couch exhaled dust when I sat. I didn't turn on a light. In the blue of almost morning, the framed photos on the bookshelf turned into silhouettes of strangers who coincidentally had our faces. A younger us grinned from the Grand Canyon's edge. A slightly older us leaned into each other at a friend's wedding. Mid-laugh, no idea. I tried to remember what we'd been laughing at and couldn't, which felt like another kind of betrayal. I told myself I'd feel different once the sun came up, that sleep deprivation was a trickster, and daylight would press everything back into place. I waited for the window to bleach slowly from graphite to pearl. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a garbage truck announced itself by shaking the street awake. A jogger's rhythm tapped past. The day arrived carrying its usual list of tasks, as if nothing had happened. Wren's alarm went off, a bright bird call she'd never once let complete its song. She silenced it, showered again, moved through the morning with the efficient grace of someone assembling a display in a storefront. I heard the soft clink of a mug, the airtight smack of a travel lid, the click of her watch band. She didn't look into the living room as she passed. I don't think it occurred to her I might be sitting in the dark. The front door side open, then shut. Silence. On the kitchen counter, beside a ring of coffee the size of a coin, she'd left a note in her neat, forward-leaning script. Early meeting. Back late. You were amazing last night. Thank you for being you. Love, R. I held the note between two fingers, as if it might stain. Thank you for being you. I placed it face down and stood very still, like movement might trigger a trap I didn't yet understand. The house waited with me. I didn't go to work. I told myself I'd call in late, and then didn't call at all. I sat at the table and let my phone vibrate once with a calendar reminder, and then fall quiet, embarrassed on my behalf. Around 10, I made coffee by muscle memory and took one sip that tasted like a dare. I put the mug in the sink and watched the swirl of brown vanish into the drain, a tiny galaxy going out. By noon, I had convinced myself that the night was a misunderstanding dressed up as a performance. I even tried on forgiveness like a suit, stiff at the shoulders, too shiny, something you keep for funerals. That was the hour I opened my laptop to answer emails and saw the firm's social media post. A clean clip of Wren at the mic, her smile like a sharpened coin. The caption full of lightning bolt emojis and words like fearless and unapologetic. I hovered over the thumbnail until it began to play without sound. I watched the moment my name reached her mouth. I watched the moment the room turned to look at me, the camera catching my confusion in crisp detail. I watched myself lift my glass and perform gratitude. I unmuted. The laugh track wasn't a track. I closed the laptop so gently it felt like reverence. My heart did that running thing again. For a long time I stared at the closed lid, at my faint reflection in the brushed metal, at a man I recognized and didn't. When the next thought arrived, it didn't ask for permission either. It came fully formed, simple, steady. You can't unknow this. I turned the laptop back on with 2 fingers, as if it were a sleeping animal, and scrolled to the comments. Words stacked into a wall. Queen. Put him in his place. Iconic. A parade of strangers cheering for a punchline they believed was harmless because it wasn't delivered to them. Somewhere between the 5th and the 50th comment, something inside me stopped trying to interpret. I wasn't diagnosing anymore. I was observing. The air in the house felt different, like we'd rearranged the furniture while I slept, and I was walking into sharp corners I hadn't expected. I didn't call her. I didn't plan a speech. I did what I've always done when I don't know what to do. I cleaned. I wiped the counters until they squeaked. I folded the throw blanket she never puts back the way I like it. I lined up the salt and pepper like a pair of small soldiers. I returned a pen to a drawer it had escaped. Under my right palm, the table was slightly uneven. It had always been slightly uneven. By the time the light outside shifted from white to the faint gold, that means the day is remembering how to end, I'd made exactly one decision. I would not perform tonight. I would not fill the silences for both of us. If she asked for air, she could find it on her own. The door opened. Her keys spoke in their small brass voices and fell into the bowl. "Hey," she called. "Sonny," the syllable that solves everything. "Hey," I answered. Neutral weather. She stepped into the kitchen and kissed my cheek. I turned my face just enough that her lips found skin, and not my mouth. She launched into a story about a client, about a sudden pivot, about the thrill of saving something that might have failed. I listened. I waited for the part of me that wanted to be proud to wake up, and it didn't. When she paused for breath, I said quietly, "Do you know what you said last night?" She blinked. "The speech?" "About me," I clarified. "About knowing my place." She laughed a small, dismissive sound, like shooing a fly. "It was a joke, Emery. God, why are you so sensitive lately?" I nodded once, as if she'd offered a fact. Then I walked past her, down the hall, into our bedroom, and locked the door. Behind it I could hear her faint chuckle become silence, and the silence stretched until it became something else. A rope pulled taut between 2 points that had once been close. On my side of the door, I sat on the floor with my back against it and noticed the cool of the wood through my shirt, the slow, regular thud of my heart in the soft shell of my ear. There are moments when you can feel your life separating like strands, where one version of you steps forward and the other lingers behind, and you understand you're saying goodbye without sound. I didn't sleep much that night, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the not sleeping. I let the dark do its work. Somewhere near morning, a thought arrived with the patient certainty of weather. Tomorrow, I will need space. And for once, I didn't argue with myself. I left before the sun decided what kind of day it wanted to be. No note, no explanation. Keys, wallet, jacket. The door closed with the soft, guilty click of someone removing a painting from a wall while the house is asleep. I drove without music. The highway unspooled like a long, gray sentence, and I let it finish me. When the city thinned into low warehouses and skeletal billboards, the lake appeared at the edge of the road, the way memories do. Suddenly, as if they'd been waiting just out of frame. We used to come here when money meant gas and a shared sandwich. Back then, Wren would tuck her knees into my side on the bench, draw little shapes on my wrist with a fingernail, and tell me about the future like it had already RSVP'd. Promotions, a corner office with a plant that refused to die, a passport fat with stamps, a house with windows so big we'd have to learn where to stand in the mornings. In her version, I was always there, holding the light steady while she stepped into it. The bench was still there, scarred wood, a plaque dedicated to someone whose dates implied a life both long and fast. I sat. The wind skimmed the lake in small shivers. A gull laughed at something I couldn't see. Somewhere behind me, a truck door slammed and boots crunched gravel, but the world kept its distance. I called my manager and left a message about taking a couple of days. "Everything okay?" He texted a minute later, which is modern for "I care enough to ask, but not enough to insist." I typed family stuff and put the phone face down like it had been misbehaving. Minutes passed in their disguise as hours. I watched a small boat fuss with its rope and think better of freedom. Across the water, a stand of reeds drew a pale green line under the sky. I tried to remember the last time I'd been truly alone, and couldn't. Marriage, it turns out, is loud even when no one is speaking. It fills the room with the sound of expectation. I kept catching myself performing for an invisible audience. Straighten the shoulders, relax the jaw, breathe like you aren't being graded. I realized I'd learned the choreography so well that I was still doing it without her. By late morning, I had a coffee from a gas station, hot enough to seem useful, and a notebook from a convenience store with a cover that said, "Lists make living easier." I turned to the first page and wrote, in ordinary blue ink, the most unremarkable sentence of my life. I need space. Then below it, as if the pen had been waiting, from the noise that calls itself support, from being the background, from seeing myself the way a crowd sees me, from the version of her that wins and the version of me that applauds. I didn't know what to do with that list once it existed, except stare at it until the letters became decorative. A breeze tried to tear the page loose. I pressed it flat with my palm, like it was a small, frightened animal. Around noon, an older man in a camo hat asked if I was getting anything, which I eventually understood was about fish. "Just air," I told him. He nodded like that was a kind of catch. Afternoon stacked itself into layers. Light, water, the slow pivot of the sun, and I lay back on the bench and let my spine memorize the wood. I could have called her. I could have told her I was at the lake where we used to pretend a cheap picnic was a vacation. I could have asked her to come and watch the sky turn heroic. But every version of that call ended with me explaining a joke she never thought was sharp. By evening, I felt emptied out but not cleaner. I booked a room at a roadside motel because it was there and because I wasn't ready to hear our house breathing without me. The ice machine hummed like it had secrets. The bedspread was the particular floral pattern found only in places that want you gone by 11. I lay on my back and practiced the sentence I would say if I drove home in the morning and found her at the table sipping her victory coffee. I'm not angry anymore. It sounded almost true, which worried me. Indifference is a tranquilizer if you don't watch the dose. At 3 a.m., I woke to the motel hallway arguing with itself. A door shut twice, as if undecided. I sat up and wrote another list, not of grievances, but of small firsts I wanted to remember, in case this turned into a story that someday required proof I'd been awake inside it. First night I didn't check the door twice for her safe return. First morning, I didn't rehearse a version of me that would make her day easier. First breath that wasn't an audition. The next morning the sky was the color of old salt. I drove back to the lake and sat for an hour, then 2, as if knowing when to leave would ruin the spell. When the sun finally shrugged up its shoulders and got serious, I went home, not with a plan exactly, but with a decision. I would stop filling the silence to make her comfortable. Our house met me with the blank face of a place that doesn't remember you. The air felt stale in that particular domestic way, the perfume of yesterday's life refusing to evacuate. The curtains hadn't moved since I left. The throw we always fought about my insistence on folding, her insistence on existing, lay in the precise shape I'd given it. Her phone sat on the kitchen counter, tethered to a charging cable like a dog to a post. I didn't intend to touch it. In our marriage, trust had meant not needing to look, and privacy had meant gratitude for the assumption that there was nothing to see. I put my keys in the bowl, lined them up with the house key pointing true north, and opened the refrigerator to pretend I was thirsty. I closed the refrigerator without choosing anything and faced the room that had hosted our life. 2 coffee rings darkened the counter. A folded napkin waited for a stain that hadn't arrived. Upstairs, the closet was missing my navy jacket, which should have been good news, but somehow felt like a theft I'd committed against myself. I stood at the sink and watched the neighbor's dog patrol the fence the way the dog always does, nose to plank, certain it is protecting something. The phone chimed behind me, one small, eager sound, and my heart jolted foolishly, like a student caught daydreaming. I turned. The screen had lit with a name I recognized, not because I knew the man, but because I'd heard it delivered with a certain lift at the party, like a word with a secret compartment. Chase. The impulse that moved me wasn't fury. It was a quiet, terrible curiosity, the kind that ruins the rest of your life or saves it, depending on the day's weather. I told myself I was checking the time, that I'd brush the screen and it would roll over and go back to sleep. My thumb woke it fully. A thread opened, not a see just one conversation high-pinned like a medal. I did not inhale for a second or 5. The most recent message sat at the bottom, time-stamped close enough to now that the light felt accusatory. You looked amazing today. I still taste you. The room shrank to the size of that sentence. I read it twice because the first reading felt like sabotage. The third time I tried to find a way those words could be innocent, and failed. My body did a series of small, practical things while my mind caught up. I set the phone down with the care you give a fragile museum piece. I turned the faucet on and off. I leaned my palms on the counter to confirm I still had weight. I didn't throw anything. I didn't rehearse a monologue. I walked to the bathroom and stared into the mirror like a man introducing himself. I expected anger and found cold. Not ice can break. This was the temperature of deep water that asks nothing except that you notice you can't breathe there. When I could finally move without betraying myself, I returned to the phone and scrolled. It didn't take long. The thread wasn't a novel, just a perfectly curated chapbook of proximity late-night check-ins, inside jokes dressed like compliments, photos framed for plausible deniability. Enough to confirm what my stomach already knew, not enough to defend in court. I took screenshots with the technical indifference of a lab tech. My own email address felt like a stranger's when I typed it into the to field. I did not include a subject line. I did not include a note. The images left the house and condensed into a place where my future self could retrieve them if the present me tried to convince him he'd imagined it. The sound of water upstairs startled me. For a second I thought I'd dreamed it, but the pipes confessed. The shower. Running. I hadn't heard the front door. She must have slipped in noiselessly. A practiced ghost. I placed the phone exactly where I'd found it. Screen black. Cable arrow straight. A beat later, her voice carried down the hall, buoyant in that casual way she wears on days that go her way. Em, you home? I considered my options and picked the only one that didn't require me to perform. Yeah, I answered, my voice as undecorated as tap water. Good, she called over the shower's hiss. Hey, can we go out tonight? There's a new place on Maple Chase says the pasta is criminal. Something in the word, criminal, flicked a switch I didn't know I owned. I stared at the square of light the window made on the floor, at the dust dancing like it had scored tickets to opening night. My mouth and my lungs made a quiet, unanimous decision to survive. I sat at the table with the notebook and wrote one line in a hand that didn't wobble. You made choices. Then I closed the cover and placed my palm on it until the heat of my skin convinced me it was true. When she came down the hall in a towel, smelling like eucalyptus and a future I no longer recognized, she saw me and smiled carefully. The way you smile at a skittish animal you need to coax back into the yard. Hey, she said, you disappeared on me. I went to the lake, I said. She tilted her head. That's far. Not really, I answered. It's the same distance it's always been. She laughed softly like I'd tried a joke. Well, I'm glad you're back. I nodded. I had returned to the house. The rest of me had not. That night, I didn't start a fight. I cooked nothing. I offered nothing. We existed parallel, two lines that once intersected, and now only recognized the theory. When she brushed against me at the sink, a deliberate accident, I stepped aside. Her mouth formed a question she wasn't ready to ask. She let it go. Past midnight, with the house reduced to its baseline frequencies, I opened my notebook again. The sentence I'd written at the lake stared up at me. I need space. I added a period so firm the paper dented. Then I turned to a blank page and made room for what came next. I wrote down the date and the time. I wrote down the text I could not unread. I wrote down the way my hands did not shake. And then I drew a very small box in the margin and checked it. Not because anything was finished, but because something had finally begun. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. I did the opposite. I let the house breathe. Let the ordinary noises make their argument for normal. The dishwasher clicked. A neighbor started a mower and changed his mind. I moved through the rooms with a kind of reverence, like a museum guard who knows that touching the canvas changes the painting. When the shower stopped, I was at the table with my notebook open to a blank page. Wren padded down the hall wrapped in steam and eucalyptus, hair up, a towel making a neat white border at her collarbones. She smiled the way people smile at stray animals, gentle, palms out. Should we try that place on Maple tonight? She asked. Chase says the pasta is criminal. I could feel the sentence lodge and splinter. I'm not hungry, I said, folding the sentence so small it wouldn't cut me coming back out. She looked at me for a heartbeat longer than usual, then let it pass down the river with the rest. Okay, she said, and the day proceeded as if we'd agreed to it. When she left for a meeting, I went back to the counter and picked up the phone again, not like a thief, but like a man checking the time and finding a trap door. The thread hadn't moved. The words were still there, ridiculous in their certainty. I still taste you. I scrolled up, not far, and found the architecture of intimacy built from tiny, ordinary bricks. You up? Made me think of you, ha-ha. A photo of a bar napkin with a lipstick stamp that wasn't hers because hers doesn't smudge. A voice note from him. A few low words I had to play twice to catch "See you soon," boss killer, followed by a laugh that presumed permission. There's a difference between rage and record-keeping. Rage wants to burn the house down. Record-keeping wants to measure the beams before it collapses. I took screenshots in quiet succession, each one a slide labeled for some future exhibit my heart hoped to never attend. I mailed them to myself in batches, subject lines empty as open hands. When the last image whooshed into the ether, I closed her apps, wiped my prints on the glass with the hem of my shirt, and set the phone down exactly where it had lived before I knew it was a door. The rest of the afternoon I lived like an understudy who knows the lead isn't going to make it to curtain. I watered the snake plant that refuses to die. I folded towels like a person who believes corners can save you. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom and counted shirts on hangers, as if inventory could tell me whether my life was still mine. She came home bright and fast, like a car cresting a hill too quickly. "We landed the pitch," she said from the entryway. "They all but kissed my shoes." "Congratulations," I said, meaning it, and not. She came close. "Can we reset?" she asked, voice low. "Last night got weird." "Words do that," I said. "They don't forget where they've been." Her mouth made a shape between irritation and pleading. She let it fall. The evening turned itself on. Lights. Cabinets opening and closing. The choreography of two people who have learned how to pass each other without collision. It wasn't until the second glass of her wine and the first hour of our best behavior that I asked evenly, "Are you talking to anyone else?" The sentence landed like glass on tile. She blinked 3 times. Countable. Medical. Then laughed, but not the kind you believe in. "What number?" "Emery? Seriously?" I let the silence stretch until it hummed. A car passed outside. The clock in the hall remembered how to tick. She pivoted to curiosity, a tactic that wins panels and dinners. "Where's this coming from?" I looked at the table. The wood was nicked near my right wrist. I'd done that in December with a serving fork. "From the same place your speech came from," I said. "From the truth." She inhaled through her nose like a runner at the starting line. Then the admission, disguised as compromise. "Okay, if you're talking about texts, it's just texting. That's all it is." She placed the word just in front of it like a little white fence, like the problem was the gate and not the garden beyond it. "You humiliated me in front of your colleagues," I said, and felt the sentence steady at the base. "And then you came home to him." Her eyes moved, not to me, but away from me, and the floor under the conversation dropped a fraction. She didn't deny it. She didn't ask which him, as if there were a crowd to choose from. She found a point over my shoulder and stared at it so hard it should have confessed. It wasn't. It didn't. She failed the grammar test and tried another. "Emery, it didn't mean anything." Meaning, as it happens, is a thing we manufacture with our hands. She wanted me to believe this was sawdust. "It meant something to him," I said, quiet. "He can still taste it." Her mouth opened the way a person opens a window when they realize the room's been filling with smoke for hours. She closed it again. The rest of her face didn't move. We didn't yell. We didn't name it. The conversation slid off its rails and came to rest in that long field couples find when the map runs out. At some point, she tried to touch me. Forearm, shoulder, a recon mission, and I stepped back. Not because I needed space in the room, but because I'd finally found some in myself. Later, she turned sweet like a faucet put on high to drown a sound. "Let me make dinner," she said, a rare sentence that felt like a borrowed coat. "Or we could order from that Thai place. You love the basil chicken." "Not hungry," I repeated, not as punishment, but as a fact. She smiled too much for the next 20 minutes, like the extra curve could repair the line. She laughed at nothing. She told me I looked nice in that shirt. She asked about my day and listened with that intent tilt she uses in conference rooms. It was theater. We were in it together and alone. When the house went quiet enough to hear the dryer drum exhale, I went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed with my phone. I opened my email, the one I'd sent myself, and stared at the attachments without opening them, as if proof becomes less true when it stays folded. Then I forwarded the message to a second account I barely use, a redundancy that made me feel both paranoid and sane. I added 4 words to the body, not for her, for me. You're not imagining this. She came to the doorway and leaned against it, casual like a photograph. You okay? She asked, soft. No, I said, kinder than it sounds. Do you want to talk? She offered, and I watched her select the words from the approved list. I just did, I said. You answered. The next day studied us the way a teacher studies students who've changed seats without permission. We moved through it carefully. She sent me a link to an article about couples needing novelty to stay connected and added a winky face like an organ donor sticker. I replied with a thumbs up because I didn't have the energy for a sentence. She texted at lunch, thinking of you. I looked at it for a long time and thought of the sentence I'd seen on the other screen and decided thinking is not the problem. That evening, she placed her hand on my shoulder while passing me in the kitchen. I felt the weight of it and how light it was. I'm sorry, she said to the pan, not to me. I didn't mean to make you feel small. A lesser mercy, I thought, and said nothing. When she went to shower, I opened the thread again and scrolled further back, past the confetti of winks and convenient late nights, to the origin story. A project weekend, a drink after, a shared car because the rain had been dramatic. 2 adults telling themselves the story we always tell when we want permission. We didn't plan this. And maybe they didn't. But planning is not the only way you arrive. I took 3 more screenshots almost out of obligation. Then I closed my eyes and pressed the phone to my sternum, not to feel anything, but to remind myself there was a bone under there that had a job other than breaking. That night, while she slept with the slack mouth of a person who believes in mourning, I lay awake and watched the ceiling fan measure the dark. The anger I kept waiting for didn't come. Something else did. A slow, exact recalibration. This was not the moment that shatters you. This was the one that teaches you how to stand up differently. I got out of bed around 2 and sat at the kitchen table in my t-shirt, the notebook open. I wrote down the question and the answer like it was a lab report. Q. Are you talking to anyone else? A. It's just texting. Then beneath it, in smaller print. In a fire, smoke is just smoke until you can't breathe. I listed what I knew. She had choices. I had proof. We had an audience. My self-respect had been performing in a show I no longer wanted to be in. I drew a small square in the corner and wrote exit under it. Not a plan yet. More like a compass drawn by a child who still believes north is a place. Before dawn, I did a simple, old-fashioned thing. I changed 1 password. Nothing strategic. Just enough to remind myself I could still choose. In the morning, she made her version of peace. An apron she never wears. A playlist she saves for company. A pan of eggs she doesn't like. She slid a plate toward me, the way you slide a treaty across a table. Truce? She asked, eyes hopeful and wet. I don't want a truce, I said gently. I want the truth. Her face flinched. she recovered. "I told you," she said. "It didn't mean anything." The sentence hit the floor and lay there, unhelped by its own certainty. I stood, took my coffee, and walked to the window. Outside, the neighbor's dog was worrying a patch of grass as if it owed him an apology. The street had already decided to be busy. The sun had already made up its mind. Behind me, Wren's chair scraped. Her footsteps approached. A hand hers, familiar and foreign, touched the back of my neck, tentative, an old map pressed to new terrain. "I'll fix it," she whispered. "I'll do anything. Just don't give up on us." "Okay," I said, and heard my first real lie to her arrive without rehearsal. I took my mug to the sink, rinsed it clean, and placed it on the rack with an accuracy that felt like prayer. Then I went to the hall closet and reached past the coats to the shelf where we keep things we might need someday. I pulled down an empty duffel and set it on the floor, then closed the door softly so the sound wouldn't announce more than it had to. I didn't pack it. Not yet. I just let it sit where I could see it, the shape of a future making its case. On the way back to the kitchen, I brushed my fingers over the keys in the bowl. They chimed their small metallic chord, true north glinting from the house key's flat smile. A little later, while she dried her hair to a tempo we used to share, I sent the email with the screenshots to a third address and printed a single page in black and white. I didn't read it. I slid it into a manila envelope and tucked it behind the cookbooks we never open, next to the one about homemade pasta. When the printer cooled and the house settled, I sat down again, breathed in, then out, and felt the quiet do what applause never could. Tell me who I am when no one is watching. I looked at the duffel, at the envelope, at my hands, steady over the paper. The room wasn't spinning. The map wasn't blank. There was a box in the margin with a word under it. Exit. The day after the envelope and the duffel, Wren turned sweet like weather. Not the kind of sweetness that grows on trees, the kind piped from a bag and shaped into roses. She cued a playlist we used to put on for company, tied an apron over a dress that didn't deserve grease, and narrated recipes she Googled out loud, as if describing comfort could substitute for making it. "Basil or thyme?" she asked, holding both like a magician about to choose the card I'm thinking of. "Whatever you like," I said, and watched the words land without echo. She set the table with the careful ceremony of a peace talk. I sat and mostly watched the steam leave the food in thin, invisible threads. She smiled too often. She touched my wrist, as if that had always been the hinge. She tried sentences like, "I've been thinking about us, and maybe we should do a weekend away." And I kept discovering how many ways silence can be honest. That night, she slid closer on the couch, knees angled toward me, shoulder nudging mine. "I miss you," she said, barely above the TV's low hum. "I'm right here," I answered. "That's not what I mean," she said, a ghost of the woman I once watched cry over a cheap rom-com because the dog lived. She set her head against my shoulder and stayed there. My body remembered how to move. My mind didn't. A long time later, she turned off the TV and held my face in her hands like she was checking for bruises only she could see. "I will fix this," she whispered. I nodded. The kind of nod you give a child when they tell you they're going to fly. After she slept, I took the duffel from the hall closet and unzipped it just enough to hear the teeth separate. The sound was a small, private thunder. I placed it on the floor beside the bed, a presence, not yet a plan, and lay down again, staring at the ceiling fan until it turned into a slow white clock. In the morning, I left before the house finished making coffee. I drove to the storage facility off the highway, the one with the orange doors that look like cartoon mouths. The woman at the desk slid a laminated price sheet toward me and started her script climate control, insurance, first month free if you forget to cancel. I signed and initialed in the right places with the same steadiness I'd felt while sending myself proof I never wanted. "Moving in today?" she asked, cheerfully neutral. "Just a few things," I said. Unit 217 rolled up with a timid rattle. Inside was the smell of concrete and beginning. I left the door up and went back to the car for the first load. A shoebox of photographs that never learned how to be digital. My grandfather's watch in its dented tin. The passport with pages that still believed in their own future. A folder of documents that explain who I am to people who ask in fluorescent rooms. I placed them on the middle shelf like a person setting a table for one. Back at the house, I moved like weather that won't commit drift. Pause. Drift. I took books I knew she'd never open but would notice missing. A collection of stories my mother loved. The paperback with a spine repaired by tape and patience. I took the journal I started in college, and the cheap pen that somehow writes better than the expensive ones. I took the ring box, the one she gave me 8 years ago, because I didn't trust the story she'd tell herself about it if I left it behind. I didn't take clothes yet. Clothes look like decisions. I folded a couple of shirts into the duffel anyway, the kind of neutral blues you could wear into a future without scaring it. I slid the bag under the bed, back far enough that you'd have to kneel to see it. I stood, listened for the familiar choreography of her return keys, heels, voice, and felt strangely calm when it didn't come. At noon, I toured an apartment I found online at 3 a.m. It was downtown, over a small parking lot that looked like an unfinished chessboard. The leasing agent was 24, and efficient in the way of people who won't apologize for doing their job well. "One bedroom," she said, swiping through a laminated set of photos like they were tarot. "Great light in the afternoon. Laundry in the building. No pets over 30 pounds. "What about ghosts?" I asked, surprising both of us. She smiled, as if the joke cost nothing. "Only the friendly ones." The place had the kind of floors that complain politely when you cross them, and a window that could be mistaken for a view if you stood at the right angle. I looked at the walls and imagined silence hanging on them like art. I ran a hand along the kitchen counter and felt nothing. It was almost a relief. "You want to put a hold?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and watched my mouth make a future my heart had already drawn in the margins. I signed where she pointed. The deposit made the kind of sound on the screen that money makes when it stops being yours. It didn't hurt. On the drive home, I turned the radio on and off twice, unable to find a station that matched the weather inside my ribs. At a red light, I imagined calling her and telling her I'd found us a place to start over, to downgrade the war to a skirmish, to declare amnesty. The light turned green. I kept going. That evening, she came home carrying a bottle of wine we used to save for cold nights. "Peace offering," she said, raising it like a flag. "We don't need wine," I said. "We need honesty." "We have that," she said too quickly. We will." I tilted my head. Future tense. She winced. "Present," she corrected, and added a smile that didn't have any furniture to sit on. She cooked pasta oversalted, overcooked, and watched my face like it was a scoreboard. After 2 bites, I set the fork down. "We have to fix this," she said. Softer now. "I don't recognize us." "I do," I said. "I recognize every piece. I just don't like the arrangement." She reached for my hand. I let her find it. For a few breaths, we pretended the table was a raft, and the ocean had decided to be kind. Then she said, "I told Chase I'm pulling back. We can avoid the same projects. We can set boundaries." I nodded without letting it mean more than acknowledgement. Boundaries work best before the fire starts. Her eyes pooled, then steadied. "Please, Emery." "I'm here," I said. "I'm listening." Both were true and insufficient. When she slept that night, I went room to room with the quiet precision of someone preparing a house for winter. I photographed the contents of drawers as if I were inventorying a museum collection. Spoons that know which hand I favor. A stack of receipts that could map a decade. 2 boarding passes from a trip we took before we started choosing different windows on the plane. I took pictures not for proof, but for goodbye. I copied a few files to a drive and slid it into my pocket. I checked that the tires on my car remembered how to be tires. I changed one more password and wrote it, carefully, in my notebook, because I am human and forget. The next morning, I carried a banker's box to Unit 217. Birth certificate, insurance papers, the small tin of screws and nails you keep because someday something will come loose. I set the box down and realized I'd been holding my breath for 2 blocks. I let it go, and with it a sound I don't think I'd made since I was a child. Something between a sob and a laugh. A noise the body makes when it sees the door and believes it this time. On the way back, I bought 2 spare keys and a simple ceramic mug from a discount store. The mug was white, uncomplicated, large enough to suggest mornings that didn't involve negotiating the temperature in 2 hearts at once. I put the bag in the trunk and felt like I'd smuggled home a small, legal future. Wren called as I turned onto our street. "Dinner out tonight?" she asked. "Or I can make something your call." "I'm not hungry," I said gently. "But sit with me." We sat. No TV, no music, just the clock insisting on being noticed. She tried to fill the silence with weather and office politics, and a story about a barista who remembered her name without asking. I let the stories pass through me. Then, because I wanted to leave the room honest for whoever lived here next, I said, "I'm not going to shout. I'm not going to punish you. I'm not going to fix this alone." Her chin trembled once, the way a bridge does under a heavy truck. "What do you want me to do?" "Own it," I said, "because until you do, anything we build will lean." "I'm trying," she whispered. "Trying is a future tense, too," I said, not unkind. She cried then, the kind with little sound and big air. I stood. I didn't move to hold her. I walked to the kitchen and rinsed my empty plate as if it had done something brave. When I came back, she'd stopped crying. She looked small. She looked like someone I had already forgiven, which is different from someone I could stay with. That night, I booked a room at a highway hotel with brown carpet and an ice machine that thinks it's a chorus. I packed lightly. Toothbrush, 2 shirts, a book I've been pretending to read, the notebook, the drive, the envelope now fat with printouts I hoped never to show anyone. I wrote a sticky note and left it on my desk, where she'd see it without feeling hunted. taking space. Back tomorrow. It was true and incomplete. At the hotel, the bed was too firm in the way mattresses are when they don't know your name. I lay on top of the covers and stared at the ceiling, which showed me every person who had ever stared at it before me. I opened the notebook and drew a small calendar for the next week. On Tuesday, I wrote one word: leave. On Monday, I wrote sign. On Wednesday, I wrote breathe. It felt absurd and holy. I slept badly and woke clear. In the morning, I signed the lease. The agent handed me a key on a cheap keychain and said, "Welcome home," without irony. I stood in the quiet box of my new living room and felt nothing theatrical. Relief is not a parade. It's air. Back at the house, Wren noticed my absence without interrogation. "You okay?" she asked, soft, like the question was a hand extended over water. "I will be," I said. She nodded, took it as medicine she didn't like the taste of, and went to shower. The pipes sang their old, familiar song. I went to the bedroom and retrieved the duffel. I added socks, a sweater, the white ceramic mug wrapped in a t-shirt. I zipped the bag and stood there listening to the zipper's last tooth click into place. The sound was small and irreversible. That evening she tried a different tactic. Memories. She pulled out a box of old photos, scattered them on the coffee table, and pointed to versions of us who had no idea. "Look," she said, laughing wetly at a picture of me with a haircut that should be a crime. God, we were children. "We were," I said, and didn't add the sentence that came after, "and we pretended to grow up the same way." "Do you remember the rain at Connor's wedding?" she asked. "You held the umbrella like it was a crown and insisted I walk under it first." "I remember," I said, and felt the echo of water running off our shoulders, and for a moment I wanted to forgive everything if it meant I didn't have to move the furniture of my life again. But forgiveness is not furniture. It's weather. You can't keep it in place with a rug. We put the photos away. She went to bed early, exhausted from rehearsing a kindness that didn't fit. I stayed up and cleaned the kitchen one last time, as if I were preparing it for a new tenant. I set my keys in the bowl and turned the house key so true, north pointed toward the door. I wrote one sentence on a card and slid it into the envelope behind the cookbooks. You made choices. I made one. Then I placed the envelope beside the keys and stared at the arrangement until the meaning stopped shifting. In my notebook, I drew another small box and labeled it ready. I checked it without ceremony. Tuesday waited like a quiet room at the end of a long hallway. I didn't know what she'd say when the door finally learned how to close. I didn't know if her face would fold into a shape I'd never seen, or if she'd rehearse composure and stick the landing. I didn't even know which version of me would carry the last box to the car, the one who remembers the vow in the doorway with the rain, or the one who remembers the microphone and the laughter and the sentence about knowing my place. I knew only this. I had built an exit that wouldn't collapse when I walked through it, and somewhere across town, a small, imperfect apartment was waiting with a window that didn't promise a view, but did promise a sky. Tuesday came on gray feet, not dramatic, not with thunder, just a soft, even light that makes every object look honest. I woke before the alarm and lay still, listening to the house name itself. The quiet gasp of the vents, the small tick of a cooling pipe, the distant truck that always mistakes our street for the one after it. Wren's Pilates class was at 8. She never missed it. She moved through the morning like a song she'd practiced. Shower, eucalyptus, hair twisted and pinned. Gym bag zipped with that neat, decisive sound. We met in the kitchen, as if it had been staged. "Coffee?" she offered, voice careful, like a hand extended over a skittish animal. "No thanks," I said. "I'll be fine." She studied my face for a sign that might save her. "Tonight," she tried. "We could—" The sentence lost its footing and fell between us. "Drive safe," I said, and meant it. She nodded, kissed the air near my cheek, and left the way the weather leaves suddenly, as if it had somewhere better to be. I waited 15 minutes because ritual matters when you mean to be kind to the past. Then I took the duffel from the bedroom, the banker's box from the hall, the envelope from behind the cookbooks, and walked the length of the house one last time. I opened the blinds in the living room and let the flat morning come in. I straightened a frame that had been happily crooked for 3 years. I set my keys in the bowl on the console and turned the house key so its flat edge pointed true north, as always. Beside the bowl, I placed the envelope with its single, unadorned sentence. "You made choices. I made one." Her favorite scented candle. Unsurprising, Fig sat on the counter with a burnt wick and a memory of sweet smoke. I touched the glass like it could tell me a warmer story, and then let it go. The refrigerator hummed. The fan measured time. The door waited politely. When I lifted the last box, my hands remembered everything they'd carried here, and everything they wouldn't anymore. I took one slow breath because I wanted my lungs to learn a new shape, and then I walked out. The door didn't slam. It closed the way the goodbye's worth keeping close. Quiet, precise, final, without flourish. In the driveway, the air felt a degree lighter, like someone had opened a window in a room I didn't know I'd been sitting in. I loaded the car with the calm of a man who is finally doing the thing his body decided, before his mouth. I looked once at the windows that used to hold our faces and saw only glass. Unit 217 opened like the last page of a chapter that has already decided to end well. The concrete floor looked the same as yesterday, uninvested, patient. I set the box on the shelf with the small, reverent movements you use in museums and hospitals. The watch, the papers, the ring she gave me 8 years ago, a circle waiting for a story. I placed it in the dented tin beside my passport and felt a quiet click somewhere under my ribs, a soft, definite alignment. The apartment key felt lighter than it should in my palm, like a coin no one can spend but you. I climbed 2 flights, the stairwell smelling faintly of detergent and somebody's toast. Inside, the rooms were exactly the size they'd been yesterday, which is to say, enough. I set the white ceramic mug on the counter and laughed under my breath at how ridiculous it felt to own something designed for a future. The laugh didn't echo. It hung in the air, and then dissolved the way small mercies do. I didn't make a speech to the empty room. I didn't perform gratitude. I opened the window. It showed me a parking lot and a slice of sky too ordinary to be a metaphor. That's what I wanted, a sky that wasn't trying to be anything but itself. By noon, she'd texted once, "Where are you?" I let the screen go dark. An hour later, "Emery?" Then, "We need to talk." Then, after a long pause, the one word that had always worked on me before, "Please." I sent one sentence because I owed the truth and not a performance. "I'm safe. I need space. I won't be home tonight." The typing bubble pulsed, as if it were a living thing trying to breathe water. Is this about the joke? About Chase? I told you. I set the phone down. I didn't need to read the rest to know the shape of it. Explanation disguised as apology. Apology disguised as rearranged facts. The phone vibrated again. Again. Then stopped, as if the day itself had put a hand on her shoulder and told her to wait. I bought a cheap set of plates, a fork, a knife, a spoon. I bought a small plant with a tag that promised it was hard to kill. I bought 2 towels that matched because I wanted to believe I could make something align without having to argue it into position. Back at the apartment, I placed each thing where it would live and felt the room grow a spine. Around 5, the sky turned the color of thinking. I made coffee in my white mug, black and unambitious, and stood at the window while it cooled. I didn't flinch. I didn't rehearse the past. I didn't negotiate with the silence. It felt like being allowed to exhale after holding your breath for a very long swim. At 7, she called. I let it ring. She called again. Voicemail bled into voicemail. The first tearful, the second angry, the third bargaining, the fourth small. I listened to none of them. Then she texted a photo of my keys in the bowl, the envelope open, the sentence lying there like a small hinge between 2 doors. Please come home and talk to me here, she wrote. Don't do this in messages. Don't make me the villain. The word villain sat there like costume jewelry shiny, loud, not worth much on the scale. I typed and erased twice, and then I sent a different truth than the one my anger wanted. I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting me. No bubbles. No reply. The absence felt like a decision. She showed up 2 nights later. It had rained in the city the way it always does, half-hearted, then sudden. I heard the knock and knew her by the sound. When I opened the door, she stood there soaked and shivering, hair unpinned and wild, gym bag strap cutting a diagonal across her chest like an unanswered question. I don't know who I am without you, she said, voice uncooperative with the performance. Her face wasn't arranged. It was just a face. I do, I said, because it was the first honest kindness I had to offer. And I can't be that version of you anymore. She stepped forward like she might cross a border and be allowed. I didn't move. Please, she whispered. I'll do anything. You can tell the truth, I said. To yourself first. Her eyes flicked past me to the room, taking inventory of the absence. 1 mug, 1 plant, a window that didn't pretend to be a view. This is small, she said, and the word didn't land where she meant it. It drifted and decided to be about something else. It's mine, I said. She nodded, a slow bow to a fact. Is there someone else? The question came out wounded. It expected a wound in return. No, I said. Just me. Finally. She cried then. Not the strategic tears of serious meetings. The other kind. I handed her a towel because that's what you do when a person is wet and cold in your doorway. She held it and didn't use it. Is there anything I can say? She asked. There are 100 things you can say, I answered. I can't live inside any of them. Silence found us. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even sad. It was factual. Like gravity? After a long minute, she nodded as if the room had read out a sentence we both had to sign. I'm sorry, she said. I know, I said. She looked at me like a person memorizing the features of a house she used to live in, but can't afford now. Then she turned, walked down the wet hall, and didn't look back. The echo of her steps folded itself neatly and was done. I didn't collapse against the door after it closed. I didn't slide down the wood and sob into a new shape. I made tea because the water was already hot. I stood at the window with my silly, earnest plant and watched the parking lot gather rain into precise little lakes. Somewhere, a siren rehearsed. Somewhere, a couple laughed like no one could hear them. The world did what it always does in the face of individual cathedrals burning down quietly. It continued. The first week alone was louder than I expected. The refrigerator spoke in a dialect I'd never learned, because there'd always been other sounds to translate. The building had a rhythm, someone's 9 p.m. blender, a midnight door, the 3 a.m. wanderer who forgot which floor was home. I learned to tell time by strangers' habits. I bought a different brand of cereal because I could. I took my walks without calculating how long would be too long for someone waiting at home with their foot tapping. On Saturday, I drove back to the lake, not because I'm sentimental, but because the bench had taught me how to sit with myself without taking attendance. The wind skimmed the water and pretended to remember me. I pretended to believe it. I wrote nothing in the notebook. I let the page be blank and didn't apologize. Work noticed that I was on time and not tired. My manager asked if things were okay, and I said, "They are what they are." And he nodded as if I'd quoted a philosopher. I changed 2 more passwords for no reason other than the satisfaction of watching a door click from the inside. I put the ring in the bottom of a drawer and stopped letting it audition for meaning. Ren texted a handful of times in the weeks after. The opening notes were familiar. I miss the way you listened. I miss the way you forgave. I miss the way you stayed. They were true. They were also admissions. I didn't reply. Then, one day, a different kind of message. I told my sister. I told my therapist. I told myself, "I'm sorry. I won't contact you again unless you reach out first. Read. Noted." Something like mercy. I began to journal again. Not grand entries. No manifestos from a mountaintop. Just an inventory of small, uneventful miracles. Woke before the alarm. Coffee tasted like coffee. The neighbor's kid waved as if I mattered. The plant grew a ridiculous new leaf. The air smelled like cut oranges outside the bodega. I hiked on Sundays without telling anyone where I was. I traveled 2 towns over for a sandwich because the review said the bread was perfect, and it was nice to have a reason to go somewhere that had nothing to do with saving a life. The apartment didn't transform into proof of anything. It stayed what it was, a place where none of my sentences had to arrive rehearsed. The quiet learned my name. The mug stained in a way that told me I was living and not curating. The plant refused to die. Sometimes, rarely now, I hear that roomful of applause in my head. The one where a spotlight found my face while a joke wore my name. The noise no longer climbs my throat. It passes by like a distant train. I don't wonder who's on it or where it's going. I let it go. Other times, I think about the younger version of us, rain drunk at a wedding, umbrella tilting like a crown. That memory arrives light on its feet and doesn't ask for custody of anything. It sits with me on the creaky floor, smiles at the plant, and leaves before it gets dark. I won't pretend the moral is complicated. It isn't. Love is work you do with both hands. Respect is the part you don't drop when you're tired. Self-respect is what you pick up when someone else lets theirs fall and asks you to hold it for them. The opposite of love wasn't hate, not for me. It was indifference. The clean, quiet moment when the rope you've been tugging on stops being a rope and reveals itself as air. Peace didn't arrive with a brass band. It didn't even knock. It walked in on a Tuesday and sat down across from me with my own face and said, "Finally." This morning, I made coffee without negotiating the temperature of 2 beating hearts. I poured it into the white mug that cost $6.99 and feels like a luxury because it's mine. I stood at the window and watched the sky do its work without needing me to name it. I wrote a sentence in the notebook and didn't judge its size. My name is Emery. I am not a man who knows his place because someone told him where to stand. I am a man who chose it. And when I finish my coffee, I will lace my shoes and go outside and let the day happen without me bracing for landmines before noon. That's all. That's everything.